Hello and welcome to another episode of Top3Tech. I hope you guys are having a good day today. I know it's been a little bit since I posted the last video, but with work, it's been pretty crazy. So I'm hoping to do this more regularly, but please bear with me, you guys. It's also hard to get your hands on some of these cards, but today I'm excited because once again I'm dipping into the Nvidia family. I have the MSI Ventus 3X. It's the triple fan. It's the overclock edition, it says, the 3070 Ti. So we're going to go ahead and get right into this. I have done the MSI 3060 Ti. That was the Gaming X Trio. This is the Ventus. So I'm excited to see what MSI has in store for us today. So as you can see, it says OC edition, the overclock edition on the box. It says triple fan design, Torx fan 3.0, works with MSI Afterburner. It says it has cord pipes in it. Works with MSI Center, so you can control your RGB and whatever, tweak it. I don't think there's RGB on this card. We will find out. But yeah, it says it has DLSS, of course. But I was wondering, normally it says on some of the boxes, 4K, 2K, but let's go ahead and do the unboxing real quick, and then we'll go into the specs a little further. But when I make these videos, I pretty much want people to see how it is to buy these out of the box, because it is kind of hard to get these. And since this is a review, the first half is the open box, opening it up. And then the second part is the benchmark. And since like I said, it's hard to get your hands on these, people might want to know what they are getting, especially if they're spending their hard-earned money on this. So thin padding on top, MSI envelope, what comes inside. Quick user's guide. Oh, this is a first. Normally the ones I see have the illustrations of the dragons on it. I guess that's for the more premium members. It says package contents. It has it in English. So that's the quick user's guide. It has this here, join the MSI reward program. Installation guide, support bracket, graphics card support bracket. So that's cool. It tells you how to install that. I think it's pretty nice that this comes with it. Not all graphic cards do. Not all MSI graphic cards come with it. So it's nice to see that this one does. The 6600 XT didn't come with it. Wow, look at that. The 3060 Ti Gaming X Trio did. I'm not too sure if any other ones do. It has the little dragon logo right there in the front. Not too bad. Hey, anything free is awesome. you're spending top dollar on these cards, it's nice to know that they care enough to give you, to include stuff with it. And then of course what we've all been waiting for. So it has the anti-static bag in it. There's nothing else in here. Go ahead and set that to the side. So here it is. Like I said, I don't think it has any RGB. Got to do this slowly and carefully. Let me actually get that foam patty I could put the card on top of. Get a look at this. So there's the back of the card. Here's the front. And let's get a quick zoom in on it. That way you guys can get better detail. The MSI logo is painted white on there, no LED lights. It is 16 pins, as you can see. The Geforce RTX is also painted on. The card is about 12 inches long, a little bit more, but about 12 inches, so in case you're wondering if it fits in your case. The top is painted as well. So this card comes with 4 slots, 3 of them are the display ports, the 1.4, and it also has the HDMI 2.1. So that way you can get your 2K and 4K needs in this thing. Okay, now that we're done with the zoom in and the closer look, we can go ahead and compare it to the 6800 Sapphire Pulse and then the Sapphire Nitro Plus Special Edition 6800 XT. As you can see, all the cards are pretty much similar in size. The MSI Ventus doesn't have any RGB, I don't believe. I'm like 99% sure. The Sapphire Pulse doesn't have any RGB either. And then the Special Edition Nitro Plus actually has RGB lights right here in the front. That's why their fans are see-through. This design similarly looks like the Gaming X Trio, except it's not silver right here. I mean, it has that little triangle indenture. That's kind of cool. Looks like a little diamond. But let's check out the back of these. Oh, sorry. Quick side note. I guess out of the 3, I would choose the Nitro Plus as having the best, the front. And second place, I'd probably choose the Ventus, just because it has a little design. But I do like the red lines of the poles. And here is the back of the cards. This is the black, white, and gray. This one's black, white, and red. And then this one is silver with the blue and the nitro. That one has the RGB light up right there. It has the RGB bar right here. But obviously I believe the nitro is the better looking one. That's kind of not fair. But since I have these 3 here. Second, I'd probably pick the Pulse. I like that design. And then third is the Geforce RTX, just because it looks pretty much plain. But hey, it is what it is. And of course, we're going to compare them to the side right here. On this side, like I said, the Nitro Plus has to get my recommendation as the better of the three. But if we're choosing between these two, I would probably have to pick the MSI one, just because the dragon and the logo. I do like that the Sapphire has silver right here, and it says Sapphire in red. I also like that design, the little heat vent design. But this also has this right here. So I guess if I had to choose between these two, probably the MSI one. I don't like that it doesn't say 3070 Ti. I kind of wish it did. But I mean, none of these say 6800 or 6800 XT either. And well, I guess it's about that time that we put the GPU inside the Top3Tech PC to see how it looks like in there. We'll see if anything lights up, but I doubt it. But let's go ahead and plug that bad boy in. There it is inside the PC. Has a nice fit to it. You can see it barely clears the gap right there. But let's go ahead and plug in the PC and see if anything lights up. So as you can see, it does not have any RGB that is painted on there. None right there. See, the light is just from that. So that is a little disappointing since we spent top dollar. Some people don't agree with me, but I say since we're spending top dollar on these cards, they should come with RGB. Even if, let's just say, the lettering was RGB, just have it on there. If you don't like RGB, you could always turn it off. There's some people that say they like the minimalistic looks, but there's people that probably want it, so I say include it. If you don't like it, just turn it off. But let's go ahead and get to the benchmarks. We're done with the open box and the physical review. Okay, and now for what most of you have been waiting for. Or some of you, or half of you, I don't know. But anyways, we're going to the benchmarks. But before we get started, let me introduce you to the Top3Tech PC specs. The motherboard is an Asus X570 Tough Gaming plus Wi-Fi. The CPU is a Ryzen 7 5800X. The RAM is 32 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance 3200 megahertz. And of course, we're going to be testing the MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti, the overclock edition. So when I looked online, it said it had an 1800 megahertz boost clock, but I couldn't find the core clock. When I go to my afterburner settings, it says the base is 1600 megahertz, but it always goes to boost. So take that with whatever that means. 8GB GDDR6 memory. It's on the Ampere architecture, and it's recommended to use a minimum 750 watt PSU for this bad boy. Okay, and for the first test we have is the 3D marks. And on the 3D mark, we have the TimeSpy 3D mark benchmark. To start it off, the MSI Ventus 3X did hit 73 degrees on this application. And we have the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6800 XT on top with a TimeSpy score of 16,632. The GPU score was 18,431. The next in line was the Sapphire Pulse 6800 with a TimeSpy score of 14,294. GPU score of 15,177. The card that we are testing today is the MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti with a TimeSpy score of 14,013 and a GPU score of 14,579. It did reach third in the list. Then we have an Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT leading the way of the 6700 XTs. The TimeSpy score was 13,031. The GPU scores 13,406. Then we had the Sapphire Pulse 6700 XT coming in last for the 6700 XT group with 11,386 TimeSpy score and a GPU score of 11,898. And then we had the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT with a TimeSpy score of 9,905.
a GPU score of 9853. And then we had the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060, the time spy score of 8830, and a GPU score of 8478. On the Firestrike 3D Mark benchmark, it also hit 73 degrees, and leading the way was the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6800 XT with the Firestrike score of 37,708, a GPU score of 53,175. We have the Sapphire Pulse 6800 with the Firestrike score of 34,251 and a GPU score of 44,216. Of course, we got the card we were testing, the MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti in third again with 31,443 and a GPU score of 36,696. We got the Asus ROG Strix leading the 6700 XTs with the Firestrike score of 30,583 and a GPU score of 36,790. The Sapphire Pulse was last again for the 6700 XTs. It had a Firestrike score of 28,134 and had a GPU score of 33,481. We had the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT with a Firestrike score of 25,868 and a GPU score of 29,211. And then we had the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 with a Firestrike score of 20,662 and a GPU score of 21,965. We then switch over to the MSI Kombustor. This is going to be at 1440p. For Firestrike, that was a newer application, so I didn't have a lot of graphics cards on there. On this one, this is all the graphics cards I have tested. But the MSI Ventus 3X, it did hit a top temperature of 74 degrees on this application. And the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 got first place with 66 frames per second, surprisingly beating the 3070 Ti, which came in at 62 frames per second. I'm not sure what happened there, but I thought that was pretty crazy. But then we have the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6800 XT at 51 frames per second. We have the Sapphire Pulse 6800 at 43 frames per second. Then we have the XFX Merc 6700 XT leading the 6700 XT group at 39 frames per second. We have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 at 38 frames per second. And then we go to the bottom of the list for the Power Color Hellhound 6700 XT, which got 36 frames per second. Then we have the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT at 35 frames per second. Then we have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 31 frames per second. So I got a couple MSI cards on here. When we test MSI Kombustor at 1080p, the card hit 75 degrees max temperature. And then the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 was in first place still at 80 frames per second. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti came in second with 74 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 57 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 49 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 came in at 46 frames per second. The XFX Merc 319 6700 XT came in at 44 frames per second. And then we skip to the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT, which came in at 41 frames per second. We had the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT at 37 frames per second. That's the last of the 6700 XT cards. Then we had the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 36 frames per second. Next on the list, we have Gears 5 Ultra preset benchmark at 1440p. It did run at 72 degrees. Topping the list was the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT at 120.8 frames per second. Then we had the Sapphire Pulse 6800 at 105.5 frames per second. Then we had the Sapphire Nitro Plus leading the 6700 XT group at 90.4 frames per second. Then we had the 3070 Ti MSI Ventus 3X towards the bottom of the 6700 XT group with 80.3 frames per second. The XFX Merc 6700 XT was in last place of that group with 77 frames per second. Then we have the MSI Gaming 5700 XT at 71 frames per second. We have the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 at 70.6 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming 6600 XT at 66.6 frames per second. Then we have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 at 62.1 frames per second. When we tested Gears 5 Ultra Preset Benchmark again at 1080p, we got similar results. It was at 71 degrees instead of 72. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6800 XT came in at 142.9 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 came in at 142.7 frames per second. I retested the 6800 on the newer drivers. I should probably test the XT on there as well. But anyways, we go to the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT, leading the group of the 6700 XTs at 129.7 frames per second. We have the XFX Merc 319 on the bottom of the list at 108.7 frames per second. That one also, I also tested it on the first drivers. That was one of the first cards I had gotten, so I might need to update that one day whenever I can get that card again. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti comes in at 107.8 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 6600 XT comes in at 101.9 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT comes in at 98 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 comes in at 82.7 frames per second. And surprisingly, the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 comes in at 81 frames per second. Then we head over to Forza Horizon 4 Ultra Benchmark 1440p. We have the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6800 XT leading the way at 241.5 frames per second. We have the Sapphire Pulse 6800 with 211.8 frames per second. We have the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT leading the 6700 XT group at 178.7 frames per second. We have the MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti in the middle of the group at 166 frames per second. We have the EVGA 3070 right under it at 154.9 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 151.2 frames per second. And then we have the XFX Merc 319 6700 XT at 139 or 138.2 frames per second. Sorry about that. Like I've been saying, I don't know if I might take off the 6700s, the gaming and the Merc, because those were the day one drivers. And then we have the MSI Gaming 5700 XT at 126 frames per second. Then we have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 at 109.4 frames per second. At 1080p, the highest that this card hit was 70 degrees. Then we have the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT with 286.6 frames per second. We have the Sapphire Pulse 6800 at 261.6 frames per second. We have the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT at 225.8 frames per second. And then we have the MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti at 208.3 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 202.1 frames per second. We have the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 at 178.6 frames per second. The XFX Merc 319 6700 XT is under those at 166.2 frames per second. We have MSI Gaming X 5700 XT at 160 frames per second. We have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 at 136.4 frames per second. There is a new game on this list. It is Forza Horizon 5 Extreme Benchmark at 1440p. It's a lot more demanding than Horizon 4. And I only had 2 cards on hand plus this Ventus. So let's check out the results. We're building Legacy right now. Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT came in at 94.6 frames per second. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti came in at 88 frames per second. And the Sapphire Pulse 6800 came in at 85.3 frames per second. When we tested Forza Horizon 5 Extreme Benchmark at 1080p, the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT came in at 107.8 frames per second. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti came in at 100.2 frames per second. And the Sapphire Pulse 6800 came in at 97.5 frames per second. You know what? I forgot to mention, at 1440p, the highest it hit was 72 degrees. And then on 1080p, the highest it hit was 71 degrees. As we enter the Call of Duty Cold War Ultra campaign at 1440p, the highest temperature that we hit was 66 degrees. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti was on top at 102 frames per second without DLSS, but I recommend DLSS on this game because it looks pretty nice and it does give you 135 frames per second. That's why I put it on top. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6800 XT came in at 131 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 had 91 frames per second without DLSS. With DLSS, it had 118 frames per second. We had the Sapphire Pulse 6800 at 118 frames per second. The Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT led that group at 99 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 had 67 frames per second. Without DLSS, when we turned it on, it had 92 frames per second. The bottom of the 6700 XT group was on the XFX Merc 319, or 86 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT had 72 frames per second. And the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT was at the bottom at 56 frames per second, not even hitting the 60 mark. At 1080p, Cold War hit 64 degrees maximum. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti had 139 frames per second without DLSS. With DLSS, it hit 165, leading the way. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 hit 129 frames per second. With DLSS, it hit 161 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT hit 156 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 hit 150 frames per second. The Power Color Red Devil 6700 XT led the way in that group at 146 frames per second. We had the PNY 3060. It hit 93 frames per second without DLSS. With DLSS, it hit 116. The XFX Merc 319 was on the bottom of the 6700 group at 115 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT was at 94 frames per second. And the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT was last place at 75 frames per second. Then we head on over to Call of Duty Warzone on high settings at 1440p. This is the last time I'm going to do this chart. Verdansk is over. Caldera is going to be coming up soon. So we're going to have new comparisons once that new map comes out, which means I'm going to have new results because this is going to be skewed. But let's go ahead with this. At 70 degrees is what the highest temperature it hit at 1440p. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 led the way at 175 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT came in at 166 frames per second. Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT led that group at 164 frames per second. And the MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti was in the middle at 144 frames per second. We had the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 at 140 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT was on the bottom of the 6700 XT group at 134 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 121 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT at 112 frames per second. And the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 came in at last at 108 frames per second. At 1080p, the highest that this card hit was 68 degrees. We have the Sapphire Pulse 6800 leading the way at 196 frames per second. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070Ti was at 181 frames per second. The Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT hit 171 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT hit 169 frames per second. And then we have the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT at 157 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 was at 147 frames per second. Then we have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 144 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT was at 140 frames per second, the bottom of that group. And then the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 hit 120 frames per second. And the last game that we have is Cyberpunk Ultra Preset at 1440p. The highest that this card hit was 73 degrees. I would like to think this is the ultimate test because this is the most demanding next-gen game so far, I believe. But anyways, the list starts off at the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT at 83 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 was at 55 frames per second, and with DLSS 83 frames per second, beating the 3070 Ti. I reran multiple tests on the MSI Ventus 3X 3070 Ti, and I've kept getting the same results, maybe like 1 frame less, but this is pretty much what I got, 54 frames per second without DLSS. With DLSS, 72 frames per second. I mean, I don't know what's going on there, but the Sapphire Pulse 6800 hit 59 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT leads the group on 57 frames per second. The whole 6700 XT group was pretty much the same consistently, but the last of it was the Asus ROG Strix at 47 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 came in at 32 frames per second, but with DLSS it had 44 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT had 40 frames per second, and the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT had 32 frames per second. At 1080p, the results were a little bit different. The maximum that this card hit in temperature was 72 degrees. The MSI Ventus RTX 3070Ti led the way at 87 frames per second, but with DLSS, it bumped it up to 106 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 91 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 91 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT led that group at 83 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 was a little bit behind at 71 frames per second, but with DLSS it hit 81 frames per second. And then at the bottom of that group was the Power Color Hellhound 6700 XT at 73 frames per second. We had the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 under the 6700 XTs at 51 frames per second, but with DLSS it hit 69 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT came in at 62 frames per second, and then the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT came in at 60 frames per second. So in conclusion, what do I think about the MSI Ventus RTX 3070Ti? I mean, it is a pretty good card. On some games, it was like middle of the pack. On some games, it led to the top of the charts. So it pretty much determines whether the games you play are supported more by AMD, or they're supported more by Nvidia, or if the games you play have DLSS. A lot of the games, the DLSS looks pretty good. Not too much of a difference between, non-AI gameplay, but that's up to you whether you like that or not. I got the card around $1,030, around that price. It's around the 6700 XT price right now. If they ever go lower, or either cards go lower, I mean, you can compare them at that. But if you'd rather have a 6700 XT, you can get that. If you like the 3070 Ti, go ahead and grab that. Also, the rendering looks like it's a lot better on the Nvidia cards. You know, they do have more CUDA cores, so that explains that. So pretty much whatever you want to use, it's up to you. And if you're an Nvidia fanboy, then we already know you're going to get the Nvidia card. If you're an AMD fanboy, you're going to go towards AMD. Me, I just like the better technology, and I like both cards. I would recommend this card. It's also a non-limited hash rate, so for the people that like to mine, this card is perfect for you. You can go ahead and mine your heart out. So I hope you guys liked the review. I appreciate you guys sticking around. Things are going to be a little different next time. I got newer games, and it's newer cards, so we'll see what's going on. But I appreciate everyone. Thank you for following Top 3 Entertainment, for being part of the Top 3 squad, and I hope you guys have a good day. Peace. Thank you for watching another video from Top 3 Entertainment. I hope you hit like and subscribe. Also, I'm going to have a recommended playlist, a recommended video right here, so make sure to click that as well. I appreciate you guys tuning in, whether it be to the Top 3 Tech, Top 3 Gaming, or the Why Not Me podcast. You guys are dope. I hope to see you guys in the next video. And of course, let's grow this thing together. Peace. Peace. Peace.